I only remember the really good times. If anything was a problem for us was the jealousy thing. Didn't trust me as much as he could have. He should have. Look at that tattoo. I've called and asked if I could possibly go in and just let me say goodbye, just one more time.
She was just 13 years old, too young to drive a car, too young to even sign her own contracts. Yet Tanya Tucker was already shaking the foundations of country music. When Delta Dawn hit the airwaves in 1972, the world stopped. Here was a child with the voice of a weathered soul, singing about heartbreak and broken dreams with a conviction that felt impossibly real. Fans were stunned, critics were divided, and executives whispered behind closed doors. Was this genius or exploitation? Some claimed it was dangerous to put such heavy themes into the mouth of a teenager. Others hailed her as the shock the industry desperately needed. Overnight, Tanya Tucker went from an unknown Texas girl to Nashville's most controversial star. But what the world didn't see was how dangerous it all was, not just for the image of country music, but for Tanya herself. Because while her voice made her a star, the fame, scandals, and heartbreak that followed would nearly destroy her. And the question has always lingered, how did she survive it all and come back stronger than ever? Tanya Denise Tucker was born on October 10, 1958, in Seminole, Texas, and from the very start, her life didn't look like the polished fairy tales Nashville liked to sell. Her father, Bo, worked odd jobs and moved the family constantly in search of stability, dragging Tanya, her siblings, and her mother across Texas, Arizona, Utah, and Nevada. They lived in small towns and desert outposts, sometimes barely scraping by. But there was always one constant in the Tucker household: music. Tanya grew up listening to the radio, memorizing songs long before she could read. And by the age of 9, she wasn't just dreaming about singing, she was telling anyone who would listen that she would be a star. Unlike most children who say the same, Tanya never treated it as a fantasy. She expected it, and she meant it. Bo recognized something special in his youngest daughter, and he threw himself behind her dream, eventually becoming her manager and protector in a business that would test them both.
I was very young, knew how to push the buttons. I thought there was more fish in the sea.
When Tanya stepped into a studio at age 13 to record Delta Dawn, she wasn't just another hopeful kid. She had a husky, mature voice that carried decades of sorrow, grit, and wisdom far beyond her years. The song itself told the story of a faded Southern woman clinging to the memory of lost love, and when Tanya sang it, people believed her. The contrast was electrifying. Audiences couldn't understand how such a young girl could deliver such raw conviction, and almost instantly the song exploded across the airwaves.
Delta Dawn, what's that flower you have on?
But Nashville executives weren't celebrating without caution. Behind closed doors, many were unsettled. Some whispered that the lyrics were too adult for a child, that it might even damage country music's reputation if people thought the industry was exploiting a little girl. Others saw it as lightning in a bottle, a once-in-a-lifetime chance to shake up an industry that often recycled the same polished images. The gamble paid off in ways nobody could have predicted. Delta Dawn became a national hit, catapulting Tanya into the spotlight, alongside names like Loretta Lynn and Tammy Wynette. But while the comparisons were flattering, Tanya was different. She wasn't a seasoned woman singing from experience. She was a teenager being molded into something Nashville had never seen before. A child prodigy with the voice and attitude of a hardened survivor. Fans adored her, reporters swarmed her, and record executives scrambled to control her image. Some wanted to package her as a novelty act, a sweet-faced girl who would quickly fade after her one big hit. Tanya, however, had other plans. She wanted more than just 15 minutes of fame. She wanted to dominate, and from the very beginning, she showed a determination that terrified as much as it impressed. But with that determination came danger. Fame at such a young age meant living under a microscope, being pushed into adult situations long before she was ready, and carrying the expectations of an entire industry on her shoulders. As Tanya's career began to climb, the very same qualities that made her irresistible to fans also made her a target for critics and executives who weren't sure what to do with her. By the mid-1970s, Tanya Tucker had already shattered expectations, and she wasn't slowing down. Instead of fading into the background as a one-hit novelty, She doubled down on her determination to prove that she belonged among country music's heavyweights. Songs like What's Your Mama's Name and Blood Red and Going Down proved that Tanya wasn't afraid to dig into darker, riskier themes. These weren't light-hearted teen songs about first crushes. They were ballads soaked in heartbreak, betrayal, and violence. To many listeners, it was almost unsettling to hear such a young voice channeling adult pain with such conviction. But that edge made her irresistible. She wasn't just another child singer. She was rewriting the rules of what a female artist could be. But Nashville had always been a town that loved its molds. Women were expected to sing about heartache gracefully, often with polished voices and a good girl image. Tanya didn't fit that mold at all. She was brash, direct, and unfiltered in ways that unnerved executives and thrilled fans. By the late 1970s, she was a star in her own right. But she wanted more than just chart hits. She wanted control. And in 1978, she made her boldest move yet. With the release of TNT, Tanya turned her back on Nashville's carefully crafted image of her as a country sweetheart and instead leaned into a rock-inspired, rebellious persona. The cover alone caused a storm. Tanya posed in a black leather jumpsuit, her hair wild, her expression fierce. She didn't look like a country prodigy anymore. She looked like a rebel, ready to defy every expectation. The album itself shocked fans and critics alike. Songs had a harder edge, infused with rock energy that blurred the lines between genres. Some accused her of abandoning her roots, claiming she was chasing trends or trying to shed her country identity. Others saw it as a daring reinvention, proof that Tanya was fearless enough to stand toe-to-toe with male artists in outlaw country and even challenge the rock scene. But behind the boldness was a teenager desperate to be taken seriously. She was no longer content with being Nashville's child wonder. She wanted to prove she was an artist who could not only survive, but thrive on her own terms. This reinvention wasn't just musical, it was personal. Tanya began living the outlaw lifestyle she sang about, embracing controversy instead of running from it. She became known for her fiery personality, her quick wit in interviews, and her refusal to soften her image to please executives.
Phone service, and I was talking to Shooter saying, I don't think I'm coming out there to make this record. I just don't think I can do it.
These days.
She's doing really good. She calls me and we talk all the time. She's beautiful.
Fans loved it, tabloids fed on it, and Nashville didn't quite know what to do with her. To some, Tanya had crossed a line, becoming too wild, too defiant. But to others, she was exactly what country music needed, a female artist who refused to play by the old rules. And as much as the industry tried to contain her, Tanya's rebellious streak only grew. With each album, each interview, and each shocking headline, she was building an identity that would stick with her for decades. The wild child of country music. But rebellion came with consequences. Fame and freedom had their allure, but they also came with pitfalls that could derail even the strongest star. If Tanya Tucker's music in the late 70s proved she was a rebel, her personal life in the early 80s sealed the image forever. At just 21, Tanya entered into one of the most infamous romances in country music history, a turbulent relationship with Glen Campbell. Glen was over 2 decades older, a seasoned superstar with hits like Rhinestone Cowboy and Wichita Lineman under his belt. On paper, they were an unlikely match, the young outlaw prodigy and the established legend. In reality, their pairing ignited a storm that tabloids couldn't get enough of. Their relationship was fiery, passionate, and messy. Both had strong personalities, both loved the spotlight, and both struggled with the temptations of fame. Arguments spilled into public view, reconciliations played out like soap opera episodes, and their names dominated headlines. To fans, they were a fascinating mix of romance and train wreck, a couple who seemed as likely to fight as they were to perform together. The press called them volatile, and Nashville insiders whispered that the relationship was self-destructive. But for Tanya, Glen wasn't just a lover, he was also a mirror, reflecting back the chaos of a lifestyle she was still learning to navigate. The spotlight on their relationship only intensified Tanya's rebellious image. Suddenly, she wasn't just a young singer with a wild streak. She was a woman entangled in a love affair that many saw as toxic but irresistible. Critics accused her of being distracted, more interested in headlines than music, while supporters admired her for living boldly and unapologetically. Tanya herself brushed off the scrutiny. When asked about the relationship, she often deflected with sharp humor, refusing to let outsiders dictate her private life. But behind closed doors, the highs and lows of her romance with Glenn took a toll. It was passionate, but it was also exhausting, fueling rumors that both were spiraling under the weight of fame, addiction, and constant media attention. Glenn wasn't the only headline-making connection in Tanya's life. Rumors swirled of flings and short-lived romances with stars like Merle Haggard and even pop sensation Andy Gibb. Whether true or exaggerated, the stories kept her in the spotlight and cemented her reputation as Nashville's most unpredictable star. She had become the industry's wild card, someone who could ignite gossip as easily as she could deliver a hit record. But the cost was becoming clear. For every chart-topping single, there was a tabloid scandal. For every moment of triumph, there was a rumor waiting to overshadow it. Tanya was learning the hard way that living as loudly as she sang could make her a legend, but it could also set the stage for a fall. By the early 1980s, the shine of Tanya Tucker's explosive rise was starting to wear thin. The teenager who once stunned the world with Delta Dawn had grown into a woman, but instead of being celebrated for surviving the harshest spotlight imaginable, she found herself fighting to hold on to respect. Nashville was notoriously unforgiving, especially toward women, and the same rebellious streak that once made Tanya a sensation was now being painted as recklessness. Radio stations that had once championed her began to hesitate, reluctant to promote an artist whose name seemed to carry as many scandals as songs. Critics muttered that her talent was being overshadowed by her personal life, that Tanya Tucker was more tabloid headline than chart-topping star. Whispers about substance struggles, late nights, and missed shows began to circulate. Some in the industry claimed she was spiraling out of control, living the outlaw lifestyle too fully to keep her career on track. Friends worried, fans speculated, and insiders debated whether Tanya had already peaked. What hurt most was the double standard. Male country stars could stumble through addiction, scandals, or disastrous relationships and often come back stronger. But Tanya was held to a harsher standard. Every misstep was magnified, every rumor treated as fact, and every headline another nail in her reputation. The very traits that had once made her fascinating, her independence, her defiance, her unpredictability, were now being used against her. Industry insiders whispered that she was burning out, that the young girl who once promised to redefine country music might end up as just another cautionary tale. By the mid-1980s, the doubts had grown louder. Tanya's albums weren't dominating the charts the way they once had, and Nashville began to treat her less like a prodigy and more like a liability. To many, it looked like the meteoric rise of Tanya Tucker had ended, another story of talent crushed under the weight of fame. But Tanya wasn't ready to accept that fate. She was a fighter by nature, and if the world wanted to count her out, she was determined to prove them wrong. When most of Nashville had written her off, Tanya Tucker did something the industry didn't expect. She fought her way back. By the late 1980s, after years of chaos, heartbreak, and fading radio play, Tanya re-emerged with a renewed focus on her music. The rebellious outlaw image was still there, but now it was paired with a maturity forged from surviving the storms of her 20s. Her comeback wasn't subtle. Songs like Love Me Like You Used To, Strong Enough to Bend, and later Two Sparrows in a Hurricane proved that Tanya could still deliver hits that resonated deeply with fans. They weren't just catchy melodies. They carried the weight of someone who had lived through fire and refused to be silenced. What made her return even more remarkable was the personal battle she faced at the same time. In 1989, Tanya became pregnant with her first child, Presley. In any other industry, this might have been celebrated, but in Nashville, it was treated like a scandal. Executives panicked, fearing that motherhood would destroy her career. Her father, Bo, and label representatives even gathered for a tense meeting where the first words spoken weren't congratulations, but a cold, blunt question: who's the daddy? For Tanya, it was a reminder that the industry that had celebrated her voice cared little about her as a person. She was expected to choose either the stage or her family. But Tanya refused to be boxed in. She embraced motherhood on her own terms, raising Presley and later welcoming Bo and Layla while continuing to record and tour. Still, the judgment never stopped. Male artists could juggle careers, children, and controversies without the same scrutiny. But Tanya was forced to constantly defend herself, as though motherhood made her less of an artist. Yet instead of breaking under the pressure, she turned the criticism into resilience. She poured her experiences into her songs, connecting with fans who saw not just a performer, but a woman fighting to survive in an industry stacked against her. By the early 1990s, Tanya Tucker wasn't just back. She was stronger, wiser, and more respected than ever. The hits returned, the fans rallied, and critics who once doubted her were forced to admit she had staged one of the most powerful comebacks country music had ever seen. She wasn't just the wild child anymore. She was a survivor, a mother, and an artist who proved that she could bend without breaking. By the time the 2000s rolled around, Tanya Tucker's career was in a holding pattern. She was still a respected name, a touring force with a loyal fan base, but the chart dominance of her early years had faded. To many in Nashville, she had become a legacy act, a star who could fill venues with old hits, but wasn't expected to make new waves. For some artists, that would have been enough. Tanya could have leaned on her catalog, played the classics, and lived comfortably as a nostalgia figure. But Tanya Tucker has never been content to coast. She thrives on risk, and she wasn't about to let her story end quietly. Then came the shock no one saw coming. In 2019, after years without a major studio release, Tanya dropped While I'm Livin', a raw, deeply personal album produced by Brandi Carlile and Shooter Jennings. It wasn't just another record. It was a statement. Instead of chasing radio hits, Tanya dug deep into her own life, laying bare decades of heartbreak, resilience, and grit. Songs like Bring My Flowers Now felt like confessions, sung with a weathered voice that carried the weight of everything she had endured. Listeners heard the same teenage prodigy from Delta Dawn, but now with a lifetime of scars etched into every note. The album stunned critics and fans alike. Suddenly, Tanya wasn't just a country veteran, she was an artist reborn. Younger audiences who had never experienced her prime were introduced to a voice that still burned with authenticity. Older fans who had followed her from the start saw it as vindication, proof that she had never lost her edge. And the music industry, which had overlooked her for decades, was finally forced to pay attention. At the 2020 Grammy Awards, Tanya Tucker won not one but 2 Grammys, her first ever, after nearly 50 years in the business. It was a moment of triumph, not just for her but for every fan who believed she had been underestimated for too long. But Tanya wasn't done. In 2022, she reunited with Carlile and Jennings for Sweet Western Sound, another critically acclaimed project that continued her resurgence. That same year, the documentary The Return of Tanya Tucker featuring Brandi Carlile pulled back the curtain on her life, showing fans not just the legend, but the vulnerable woman behind the music. And in 2023, the ultimate honor arrived. Tanya Tucker was officially inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. It was a recognition fans had demanded for years, and when it finally came, it felt like a full-circle moment. The teenage girl who once shocked the world with Delta Dawn now stood among the giants of the genre. For all the headlines about Tanya Tucker's music, the most personal and punishing battles of her life weren't about chart positions or awards. They were about her private choices, especially as a mother. Unlike her male counterparts, who could juggle families, scandals, and careers with little consequence, Tanya was forced to defend herself constantly. Every decision she made as a mother was dissected, every misstep magnified. Whispers in Nashville circles suggested she was reckless, that she was putting her family above her career, as though the two couldn't coexist. But Tanya refused to bow to those expectations. She raised Presley, later welcomed her son Beau and daughter Layla, and continued to record and tour. The balancing act was brutal, but she turned that struggle into strength, channeling her experiences into her music. At the same time, scandals clung to her like shadows. Her relationship with Glenn Campbell remained one of the most infamous love stories in Nashville. Passionate, explosive, and destructive. Beyond romance, her partying lifestyle, brushes with substance abuse, and sometimes erratic behavior gave critics endless ammunition. She was labeled unpredictable, even self-destructive, and there were years when fans genuinely feared she might not make it through. Yet every time, Tanya clawed her way back. The same fire that fueled her mistakes also powered her comebacks. She didn't just survive her scandals. She used them to craft an identity that was raw, unfiltered, and impossible to ignore. In an industry that demanded silence and conformity, Tanya Tucker built her legacy by refusing to apologize. Her motherhood became a lightning rod. Her romances became headlines, and her struggles became fodder for critics. But in the end, all of it reinforced her image as one of country's true rebels, a woman who lived life out loud and on her own terms. From the moment a 13-year-old girl stunned the world with Delta Dawn, Tanya Tucker's life was destined to be extraordinary and anything but simple. She wasn't just a child star, she became a symbol of defiance, a lightning rod for controversy, and a survivor in an industry that rarely forgives women for stepping out of line. Over the decades, she has been praised and condemned in equal measure. But through it all, she remained unapologetically herself. For her fans, Tanya's true power has never been just her voice. It's been her honesty. People saw themselves in her. They heard their own heartbreak in her ballads, their own rebellion in her anthems, their own resilience in her comebacks. She wasn't polished, perfect, or untouchable like many Nashville stars. She was flawed, fiery, and human. That rawness made her magnetic. Even today, when Tanya steps on stage, she doesn't just perform. She carries with her the scars of every battle, the triumph of every comeback, and the voice of someone who has lived 1,000 lives. She is more than a star, more than a survivor. She is a legend forged in fire. If you enjoyed uncovering the untold story of Tanya Tucker, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and stay tuned, because if Tanya's life has taught us anything, it's that just when you think she's finished, she always has one more surprise waiting.